I've always been fascinated by horror. I find horror-related media more interesting, the emotions they evoke, the stories about true terror, the unforgettable experiences they bring you. And because of that, I used to watch a bunch of videos talking about all sorts of cool horror games that I never actually had the balls to play myself. But there was one series that I always wanted to play: Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
The most popular survival horror franchise intrigued me for so long, and it wasn't until the tail end of 2020 and the following year that I finally actually played the games, and I thought they were okay. This series has become one of my new favorite video game franchises of all time. It's given me several scares, countless hours of playtime, stupid stories that I love, not you, and memories that I'll never ever forget. I can't get enough of these games. There's so much to dissect with each one, so much to discuss. So, while I do plan on giving some of these games their own individual videos in the future, I thought it would also be fun to kind of rank all of them. And I'm specifically referring to the main series because I haven't played many of the spin-offs, and I think ranking 12 games is already a stupid big task by itself. Though now I kind of feel bad for the guy who wanted to hear my opinion on Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D. I'll be ranking every numbered entry, including Code Veronica and Zero, since they're part of the main series also. 2, 3, and their remakes will all be counted as separate entries. However, 1 will be represented solely by its remake, as I see the remake as a direct upgrade, and I don't have much to say about the original game that couldn't also be said about the remake. One last thing, Village's DLC will be released around the same time this video comes out, and because I'm writing this script far in advance, I won't be taking it into account when ranking Village. So, with that said, we have a dozen games to go through. Pack your bags, fellas, because we're gonna be in here for a long time. You know, I don't think I have a whole lot of unpopular opinions when it comes to Resident Evil. I actually like most of the games regardless of their gameplay style because each one has similar aspects that make the series so enjoyable, such as horror, cool monsters, replay value. So even if one is a lot more action focused than the other, I can still get the same kind of enjoyment from both of them. However, even though this entry has some of those aspects, that doesn't save it from being at the bottom of the list. I'd rather play this again than the next two games on the list, but unlike those two, Resident Evil 3 Remake has always left a pretty bad taste in my mouth. Now, I know the fanbase has waged war over whether or not 3 Remake is actually good, but even then, I'd like to think most people wouldn't call it their least favorite game in the series. But it should be pretty evident by now that I'm not most people. This game came out several months before I even played any other Resident Evil game, but back then I remember finding it odd that it didn't get the same coverage that 2 Remake got a year prior. Little did I know, there was a lot of discussion going on in the community that I wasn't aware of, and it wasn't pretty. And when I finally got around to playing it, I heard the complaints. Oh, certain areas were cut? Well, that doesn't sound too bad so long as the game is still good in its own right. It wasn't. Yeah, I had my problems with the other titles I'd played before this one, but overall, my experience with the series was strictly positive till then. The 3 Remake was the first time I was actively disappointed with one of the games and thought it wasn't good. For one, the areas are more shallow than a toilet bowl. The only areas in the game with any depth whatsoever are the city and the hospital, and even then, while I like those locations and all, they don't hold a candle to the strongest areas in the other games. Every other part of the game is either really linear or a dumb scripted chase section. So after I had my fun running around the city and avoiding Pizza Man Nemesis, the rest of the game keeps you on a tight leash, and I was just wondering when was the next time I'd actually get to explore and immerse myself in my surroundings. The structure and length of this game is similar to one of RE7's DLCs, and that's not a knock at 7's DLC, but that's certainly not a good thing to say about a product that was released at $60. But my issues don't end at lackluster level design. Oh, if only it was that simple. As a remake of 3, it's pretty poor. As many of you should be aware by now, this game takes some creative liberties by removing crucial parts of the original game because they were lazy, or something along those lines. The clock tower straight up isn't here, and the waste disposal plant is replaced by a boring version of RE2 Remake's lab, so that's cool. Even important mechanics from the original are somehow dumbed down here despite it being released 20 years afterwards. One of my favorite mechanics from RE3 was the gunpowder mechanic. With it, you could make whatever ammo you wanted, provided you had the right gunpowder to craft it. It was a lot of fun experimenting with this system to overcome certain obstacles, and it let you play the way you wanted to. 3 Remake just uses a simpler version of RE2 Remake's gunpowder crafting, which was already a lot more simple than the system in 3. As for Nemesis, well, in the original, he felt like a truly unstoppable, terrifying monster that was tough as nails to take down, not just in terms of the story, but gameplay as well. But when you did manage to defeat him through proper planning and execution, you were rewarded tenfold with great weapons and resources. In the remake, he dies to a single grenade, and he gives you the equivalent of a McDonald's Happy Meal toy as a reward. And the worst part is that they almost nailed him. When he starts chasing you around the city, I felt a rush of adrenaline no other game has made me feel before. The type of stuff he's pulled on me legitimately made me question if certain interactions with him were scripted or not, and they weren't. But don't worry, everything he does later is scripted, so if you wanted that, then good for you. Unfortunately, this section is very short-lived, and for the rest of the game, he simply turns into a tool only used for scripted chase sequences and boss fights, completely losing his intimidating status and turning into an action set piece. Now then, it would be dishonest to say that this game doesn't do anything right, because it does do quite a few things well. For one, I think the controls are better than RE2 Remake. They're a lot tighter and more responsive here, which works perfectly for a more action-focused game like this. There are some fun boss fights, and the game overall has a solid foundation gameplay-wise. I just wish they built more on top of it. The story is actually a little bit better than the original game. The voice acting is great. Carlos and Nikolai are way better characters now, and this is my personal favorite portrayal of Jill. I love her attitude. She's just so done with everything, and even though the "I'll give you stars" line is so oddly misused, she has plenty of brand new iconic lines that I'll quote in front of a group of friends and nobody will understand what I'm referencing. The soundtrack is better than 2 Remakes since it actually exists this time, and some of the remixes of old songs are really good. I mean, admittedly, this isn't a terrible game or anything, but I consider it my least favorite due to how much it personally bothers me. RE3 Original is a fantastic game conceptually, however, over time it's begun to show its age. So a remake of this flawed game could have taken everything I liked about the original and made it all work. I truly believe that 3 Remake could have been one of the best games in the series, and that's why it sucks that out of every game that Capcom decided to half-ass, it had to be this one. I wouldn't have minded if it was short or if some of the areas were cut. Just have what is there be fun. But even what is there isn't really anything all that special. I know a lot of people do love this game, and I can totally understand that, but then others will completely disregard all criticism of it, and that's where I draw the line. This game absolutely does deserve the negative reception it's gotten. It fails as a remake of 3, it fails as a sequel to 2 Remake, and even without comparing it to those other 2 games, it's still nothing to write home about. They had all of the pieces there to make something fantastic, and they did nothing with them, making this the most painful example of missed potential I've ever seen. And say what you will about the next 2 entries on the list, but at least they tried.
You print money. I like money.
Well, now that I've made all but 2 people mad by putting 3 Remake below Resident Evil 6, let's talk about Resident Evil 6. RE6 is definitely the most infamous entry in the whole series. While the games had been switching the focus from horror to straight up action starting from 4, saying that 6 overdid it is like watching the whole planet explode and your only reaction being, "Oh wow, that was bad." 4 was a big shift in gameplay, but 6... Six needed to get it together. A series once known for fixed camera angles, clunky combat, tight and nerve-wracking encounters, now played like a traditional third-person shooter, with dashes, melee attacks, tons of maneuverability, a stamina bar. Not to mention you couldn't go 2 seconds in this game without something exploding. Will you cut that out? However, in recent years, I've seen a lot of people, even old-time fans, warm up to this title. So that just made me wonder if this was some hidden gem that was initially shunned by the fanbase for betraying what made the series so great in the first place. Maybe, just maybe, Resident Evil 6 was secretly genius. Now don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 6 certainly isn't the Antichrist. However, it's definitely not a very fun game either. The issues with this one don't come from the core ideas necessarily, it's the execution of them. This game is very ambitious. Too ambitious. There are 4 campaigns starring beloved returning characters and brand new ones, each with their own focuses on gameplay and a grand story to connect them all, but The story kinda sucks and is uninteresting. The returning characters here are at their weakest. Leon feels like an old man. He's not even cool anymore, dude. He's just trying too hard. Everybody wants to be a gritty, try-hard action movie character with no depth whatsoever. I get that people don't really play these games for the plot, but at least try to have something engaging here, such as likable characters that I can connect with and care for. Now, I'm not gonna go too deep here, but at least by the time it gets to Ada's story, things begin to get weird, like how our main villain is revealed to be a simp with really big hands who groomed one of his lab assistants into becoming an Ada Wong clone. Yes, that's something that actually happened. Like, this Resident Evil character has the power to bring his waifus into reality. What were the writers on? But yeah, aside from that, the story sucks, and the gameplay doesn't fare much better. The game is very action-focused, as I mentioned earlier. What we have here might just be the most in-depth combat that the series has ever seen. There are a ton of techniques here, such as sliding and dodging, or even some advanced actions I didn't find out till hours into the game because most of this information is hidden in split-second loading screen messages, so thanks for that. The combat it's kind of fun. There are a ton of creative ways you can take down the huge groups of monsters you'll be put up against. With that said, there is little incentive to even bother doing anything crazy with these mechanics because shooting and following up with a melee attack is just as effective most of the time. There's also very little progression in the combat. While you do find new weapons, you can't actually upgrade them like you could in 4 and 5. You have an upgradable skills system, but most of the skills are so situational that there's no reason to use half of them, and the best ones are the bog standard, your gun kills things faster. And why is the inventory so cramped that your inventory gets jam-packed with grenades, ammo, weapons, and they never give you enough room to work with? I genuinely had to put more time into organizing my inventory in this game than I did in the survival horror games, where the inventory was deliberately designed to be limiting for the sake of raising tension. And some of these chapters are an absolute slog. Each one is typically 40 minutes to an hour long. There are very few I'd actually consider to be good. Most are just alright, and then there are a few standouts, such as Chris's first 3 chapters, which makes microwaving a Hot Pocket look like an engaging and productive activity, and Jake's 3rd chapter being less fun than playing Twister. But the mat is actually a cactus. On the topic of those campaigns, Leon's is probably the best as it's pretty consistent in quality. Jake's is a mixed bag with some pretty awful moments paired alongside some genuinely fun parts. Ada's is just whatever, and Chris's being the worst campaign in the entire series. Also, each of these campaigns try to have some sort of theme, such as Leon's being horror and Ada's having puzzles, but they never really commit to these themes aside from Chris's being action focused because, you know, we didn't have enough of that already. Ada's has like 2 puzzles and then they forget about them, and if you find anything in Leon's campaign scary, then I'm sorry, but you probably sleep with your lights on. So with all of this negativity, how did 6 even manage to get a spot above 3 Remake? Well, first, I'd like to state that I would absolutely replay 3 Remake in a heartbeat over any one of 6's campaigns, much less the whole thing. However, maybe it's because my expectations for 6 were really low considering what I heard about it prior to playing it. Not to mention that I think 6 sorta has a reason for being in the state it's in. Despite what some may think, a ton of time and care was clearly put into it, and they tried to appeal to a wide variety of people. Meanwhile, 3 Remake has no excuse for being the way it is, and I expect more effort from Capcom than this bone-dry remake of a beloved classic. Not to mention, 6 has one really good thing going for it: the mercenaries. Dare I say the best mercs mode in the whole series. The combat finally gets to break free and shine in this insane rendition of the mode. Those stupidly designed level gimmicks or poor inventory to worry you here. Just unload and utilize your wide array of action movie techniques and have a blast making that score skyrocket. But that's about the only reason I'll ever revisit this game. It doesn't bother me nearly as much as 3 Remake does. However, I have no desire to touch it again. Next up is our first classic entry on the list. Now, if I had any of the original trilogy games this low, then I'd probably get crucified, which would be rather unfortunate to say the least. Luckily for me, none of those ones are down here, so that just leaves Code Veronica and Zero, both very interesting yet divisive titles. As for which one gets circumcised today, Resident Evil 0 is better than Code Veronica, and that is my genuine opinion. Allow me to explain. Code Veronica was a lot like a dentist appointment for me. I was dreading having to play it and get it over with, but it's ultimately something I had to do at some point. And like, I mean, I guess it wasn't that bad, but it still has a lot of annoyances that drag it down to the lower end of the list. The areas were a pretty mixed bag, mostly missing the mark. Rockford Island is a pretty big location to let the player loose in to start out, and while there are smaller parts of it I like, such as the mansion, the whole place is extremely overwhelming and it gets draining wandering all over the place trying to find out what puzzle items go where with so much ground to cover while still having to play with a tight inventory. And exploring the training facility with Chris was miserable, having to constantly hang up and take down the shotgun to access certain areas, security cameras that spawn in freaking hunters if you get caught by them. This place is a miserable mess to navigate. And now that I mention hunters, every other enemy in this game is handled terribly as well. Every new monster introduced is straight up bad. The Bandersnatches, a product of having way too much fun with Kraft macaroni and cheese, they're terribly tanky and can attack you from a long distance. And I think maybe someone on the dev team just really hates Claire for some reason, so there are like a million of them all over the place during her section on Rockfort, making that first part of the game all the more unpleasant. Poison hunters literally add nothing to the game. The hunters are already strong. I don't think giving them the ability to poison you is really necessary. And if it was just annoying enemies, then that'd be one thing, but Code Veronica takes it a step further with bad design decisions. This game is notorious for its soft lock situations. Now this is something that can theoretically happen in the other games if you run out of ammo, but if that happens, then well, you suck. Code Veronica, on the other hand, has a lot of beginner's traps. You can get stuck on the infamous Tyrant plane fight if you don't have enough ammo for it, and you can't leave the plane once it takes off. And the funniest thing about this is that normally if you found yourself in a situation like this and you just bust out the knife and try to use that, but guess what? This is the only game in the series where you can permanently lose the knife if you leave it behind in the metal detector box earlier in the game. Oops. Not to mention the fact that for some reason Chris and Claire share item box inventories, which means that either one of them can get completely screwed over if one of them takes all of the strong weapons before an important moment in the story. While all of the other games have their fair share of design flaws, Code Veronica's are the most egregious. They not only make unsuspecting newcomers' first playthroughs worse, but can completely halt their progress under the right circumstances. And even if the chance to get softlocked is still pretty unlikely, the probability of that happening is a lot higher than it should be. It's not even like it's the player's fault. Like, how dare they assume that the game where you start out playing as Claire ends with you playing as Claire, so you have her take all of the best stuff in the item box, only for you to switch back to Chris for the last segment of the game and not having the proper equipment you need to defeat the final boss because Claire has it now. Oops. Now, despite all of those major problems, I can still understand why Code Veronica is beloved by a lot of the fandom. These games encourage replayability, and on repeat playthroughs you can avoid a lot of these traps that I just mentioned. Granted, they shouldn't be here in the first place, but regardless, they can be completely ignored if you already know about them. And the game has several other qualities to appreciate outside of the gameplay. While the graphics didn't click with me at first, I must say that the presentation has grown on me a lot. Seeing fully 3D environments after seeing nothing but pre-rendered backgrounds is really refreshing. The soundtrack has a couple of banger songs, most notably the final boss theme, which goes really hard for some reason, and the story is so stupid, but in an actually enjoyable way, unlike RE6 where I just didn't really care. See, this is where RE started to jump the shark a bit. The action scenes in this one are really over the top thanks to the new presentation and graphical capabilities of the Dreamcast, but shut up, I love it. Claire and Chris are both pretty weak here, and Steve has potential, but ends up being a total incel that I don't particularly prefer. Oh, but the Ashford twins are really solid villains. Alexia has an awesome design and is quite intimidating, and Alfred is a lovely lunatic with a voice actor who's having way too much fun. And Wesker, bro, he just steals the show here. Anytime he shows up, he just says something that I find really funny for no reason at all.
Greetings.
The delivery on that line just kills me for some reason. And the final fight with him and Chris was so hype, and I can't tell if I find it ironically or unironically amazing. It's just the pure definition of raw. Code Veronica, with all of its issues, has a ton of cool, weird, or stupid things in the best way possible that give it a strange identity. While I personally don't like it that much, I can totally understand why others do. Trust me, I absolutely get adoring a blatantly flawed game. Okay, so I think the entries are going to start getting shorter. Resident Evil 5 is up next, and I'm not sure. I think I'm going to need some help talking about this one. Tyler, can you give the audience your opinion on Resident Evil 5?
Well, Luggo, I'm very glad you asked. I personally really hated the Dex cut. I think it really hurt the game's viability competitively and also playthrough-wise. In my personal opinion, while it wasn't really a big issue on the surface, I think digging into it further, it really limited how you could play the game. Also the graphics. Don't even get me started on the graphics. I know everyone makes fun of the N64 era tree, but there are so many other instances of this game where it just looks like absolute dog shit. Now, I wouldn't say both of these issues drag down the game entirely. I think the game is still pretty decent overall. But if there's one thing that I fucking hate, it's about how just unfinished and unpolished the game feels. I can't be the only one who thinks this, but I think Sword and Shield is very weird with what it wants to do. But through all of that, I think it's overall a pretty decent game. It's nowhere near as bad as games like Gen 2 or Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. Yes, I choose to die on that hill.
Tyler, what are you even talking about? Resident Evil 5 Escape to Africa is a cool game. The theme of camaraderie is portrayed really well through both the gameplay and the story. You really won't get an exciting experience playing this alone, as not only is an AI prone to doing stupid stuff, but it's sorta hard to get attached to a computer. Unless if you're a Redditor, I suppose. Playing this with a friend, on the other hand, can be a great time. Managing inventories together, deciding who carries what supplies, who gets what weapons, who drives the boat, and with proper coordination, the strategies you can pull off in combat can at times exceed what you can do in RE4 and 6. The story is serviceable, and I'd like to say that this is my favorite appearance from Chris in the series, thanks to Sheva serving as a great partner. Watching both of them form a true companionship, risking their lives for one another. And my boy, back at it again, Albert Wesker. Bro is at his peak. He's a cheesy, dramatic action movie villain here with a ton of awesome lines, and DC Douglas does an excellent job selling the character. With all of these positive things said though, you might be wondering why RE5 is still near the bottom of the list. Well, let me first clarify that I think that this game is still pretty good. But only good. There are plenty of sections of the game, such as a good chunk of the ruins, the lab, and the ship, that are just plain dull. So many long, drawn-out levels that grow exhausting quickly. Every playthrough of this game I've done lasts around 9 hours, and yet it always feels like 15, and that's not a good thing. And this was also around the time the horror started taking a back seat. No portion of this game is even remotely scary due to the setting. I mean, Africa looks beautiful here, don't get me wrong, but I personally don't see what's so terrifying about the sun being out. Unless if you're a Redditor. Though anything involving lickers in this game always gets a little silly due to how easy it is for the situations with them to get out of hand, it's pretty funny and I might scream a few times. I wish I liked this game more because 5's diehard fans have a lot to love here, but it's still a fun experience that I'll be playing over and over again with a new teammate every time. Because I got my previous one killed. I have a lot of trouble going back to play really old games from a period that I didn't grow up in. So needless to say, I was pretty nervous going back to play the original Resident Evil 2 due to it being older than the other games in the series I'd played up until that point. Honestly though, this game has held up really well. Sure, someone out there will make a stink about the blocky models, the voice acting, or the tank controls. And you know, I understand that it's hard to wrap your head around pressing up to go up, but it didn't take long at all to get accustomed to any of these things. RE2 is a great sequel to the original game. It introduced some series staple characters, Leon, Claire, and Ada, gave us iconic and cool monsters such as the horrific Lickers and the unnerving Ivies. The RPD is a great first area to explore, with it being just as expansive as the mansion from the first game, yet having so many unique rooms and puzzles of its own. The story is also one of the better ones in my opinion. The villains are better than usual, and despite him having next to no dialogue, Birkin makes for a truly intimidating looming threat, and his design and boss battles are so badass. The A and B scenario is also a genius idea that can add in so much more tension and replayability. For those of you who don't know, your first playthrough of the game will be labeled as an A scenario, and then when you finish it and save to another slot, you'll unlock the B scenario, where you play as the character you didn't choose and see their side of the story. Various things you did in the A scenario can affect the B scenario, such as using certain traps or taking specific items, which can either make the B scenario easier or harder. It's the #1 aspect that the original has over the remake, because while the remake is higher on the list, yeah, they really tickled the balls when it came to the scenario mechanic, and I wish they didn't because it would have made that game even more fun. Back to the original though, I obviously like a lot of the other games in the series more than this one, but RE2 isn't bad by any means. The worst thing about it is that every area after the police station isn't as good because they're too linear and not very exciting, but they aren't awful or anything. RE2 is one of the most airtight entries. It has a great cast of characters, an enjoyable story, good gameplay with great ideas that are executed well, and it all comes together to make make for a worthwhile playthrough. And finishing that B scenario for the first time was one of my most fulfilling experiences with the whole series. I know that we're not even halfway done with the list yet, but don't let this low placement fool you. This is still a great game. I have a bit of a weird relationship with Resident Evil 3. Conceptually, this game is probably my favorite. I love the gunpowder system, allowing you to make ammo for whatever weapon you want, provided you have the materials to do so. It allows for all sorts of experimentation and lets you play the way you want to play. And as if you already didn't have enough options, there are a bunch of different choices you can make throughout the story that can alter the locations you visit, the order of important events, and items you obtain. The game also features a bunch of RNG that can change what items you find, enemies in specific areas, and ruin perfectly good speedruns. And I like the story in this game a lot as well. The situation is more dire than ever, the voice acting isn't actually half bad for the time, and the finale is one of the most intense and climactic in the series and wraps up the original trilogy in a satisfying way. And of course, Nemesis. Long before he became a pizza man, he was the greatest monster in the whole series. He's portrayed as a great threat throughout the story, and when he's chasing you down in the middle of gameplay, you feel the intimidation and sheer terror of this monster endlessly pursuing you. Or well, at least I did. Anytime this freak showed up, I felt like a little kid being hunted by a boogeyman. No video game enemy has ever made me feel as scared as Nemesis did. And the fact that he just never gives up the chase, that you keep putting him down only for him to come back up even scarier and stronger, it turns this fictional creature into a much more personal threat. The amount of relief I felt watching Jill unload into him and making this beast finally stay down once and for all could never be matched. A fucking genius monster that they've never topped since. All of that gives this game the potential to be one of the best in the series. And while I can totally understand someone thinking it is the best, personally, I have a couple of complicating feelings regarding everything else. Everything I mentioned is wonderful. However, due to the numerous risks RE3 takes in its gameplay, it falters in some regards. For one, the area lineup might be one of the weakest the series has to offer. The city is a giant mess of halls, the hospital is small and boring, and the park certainly is a park, definitely a lot more pleasant than the ones you'd see in real life. The clock tower and waste disposal building are both good, and the game has a surprisingly strong selection of puzzles despite the more action-focused gameplay. However, I wouldn't say there's a single particularly strong location in the game, which isn't something I can say about most of the other entries. Every other game has its one signature location that's the biggest, longest, and typically the best in the game, and I think the city is supposed to be this game's best location, and that's pretty tragic. Also, while I do like the action focus for the most part, the game doesn't feel like it was entirely made for it, if you catch my drift. The tank controls and brand new quick turnaround feel nice, but in the midst of combat, especially during the Nemesis encounters, they can get in the way a lot. And the dodge is so unresponsive that I don't think I've ever used it on purpose. And even whenever it does work, you're not given invincibility frames, so sometimes you can trigger it on accident, Jill will dodge into a corner, and you'll still get hit, so the dodge actually harms you in some cases. Whenever I fight Nemesis, I either try to cheese him using specific strats or just unload on him with my strongest stuff and hope he doesn't kill me, because most of the time those are my two best options. RE3 gets really frustrating at times. I've never died so many times in an RE game before, and after a while it just gets old. However, there's a ton of stuff to love here that you won't get from any other entry. And my first experience with this one, while it had its annoying moments, it also had a ton of memorable ones too that I wouldn't give up for the world. And it was certainly one of the most satisfying ones to complete. A lot of the problems here could have been easily solved with a remake that wasn't held back by technical limitations and old design philosophies. But, we saw how that turned out. Resident Evil Village is a very special game. In terms of gameplay, tone, and aesthetics, Village took a gigantic risk. The setting is fresh and almost brand new, the monsters are unlike anything you ever thought you'd see the series dip its toes into. The gameplay is a blend between so many different styles and structures. It's a celebration of not just what the series has done and accomplished, but the horror genre as a whole, with each section of the game being so different from the last and paying tribute to so many different forms of terror. The action can be so slow, careful, and calculated 1 minute, and then an hour later turn around and become chaotic and exciting. The gunplay feels fantastic, the exploration is fun and rewarding. The village is a gorgeous location that I felt so attached to. No other Resident Evil game has felt as adventurous as this one. I was so enthralled the whole way through when I first played it. This was genuinely one of the most amazing and engaging experiences I've ever had playing any game in my whole life. And what made that first playthrough all the more great was the story. I want to kill myself for saying that. Okay, don't get me wrong, the story isn't really all that good and has stupid contrivances that I don't quite like, but going to each new location and being put up against a new memorable foe each time made the journey feel all the more grand. And dude, that finale. This was undoubtedly and unexpectedly the best the series has to offer by far. The way the game made me feel for Ethan, a character that I didn't care for a game prior, and the twist that completely blindsided me in a moment where I was convinced that I was just about to witness another stupid action ending for the millionth time. When in reality, I got to watch as a character that nobody liked finally had a moment, and I actually felt something watching him sacrifice himself. I talked about it a little bit more in this video. That ending was the cherry on top of everything I had spent the last 10 hours playing through. It was more satisfying and conclusive than I could have ever dreamed of, and I honestly think it could have served as a fantastic ending for the entire series. If it didn't make so much money, that is. Needless to say, I loved this game. And then I played it again. Yeah, the funny thing about these games is that some of them get a lot better on replays, while others fall off a bit, and Village falls off the hardest and doesn't stick the landing. Village has so many cracks in its design that become so much more apparent under the magnifying glass. There are so many sections of this game where you literally do nothing. The opening is so long and scripted and takes like 20 minutes for the game to actually start. House Beneviento is wonderful and one of the scariest sections out of all the games, and gives me a very good reason for not wanting to have children, but is it really necessary for me to spend a half an hour walking around this stupid ass dollhouse solving puzzles that I already know the solutions to, and running away from a slow as balls hot dog abortion that could never dream of catching me every single time I play the game? I really wish you could just skip this segment as a New Game Plus option. It completely loses its luster after your first playthrough. Not that the reservoir afterwards is much better, because yes, running around and pushing buttons in a scripted chase sequence and then fighting a boring and tanky boss sure is fun. The game excels in chaotic combat, however, there are very few sections where you're heavily outnumbered, so all of these cool combat mechanics and environmental hazards rarely get to shine. Speaking of combat, the way weaponry is handled in this game is pretty disappointing. For a game that takes so heavily after RE4, it sure likes to dumb down all sorts of things that make that title so beloved, such as each weapon you get just being stronger than its previous iteration, so there's no reason to use the first handgun or shotgun since they're completely outclassed by the later ones that you literally just find lying around. Or how about locking certain weapon upgrades behind a New Game Plus when you aren't even going to be using those weapons, because if I'm playing New Game Plus, then I'm one-shotting things with my overpowered Magnum. And that's not even getting into other things, such as Village of Shadows being a terrible difficulty with no sense of balancing whatsoever. Village is such a frustrating game, because that first playthrough was so wonderful and fun, and yet the more I look under the hood, the more I realized how flawed this game was. So many mind-numbingly boring sections of gameplay and stupid design choices. But then you start fighting like a billion Lycans at once and it's awesome, and you explore every nook and cranny of the village, finding resources, fighting optional bosses, feeling emotions that no other game can make you feel. I love this game. I really do, and that's why I'm so hard on it. Some people will remember Village for certain aspects, and I'm going to remember it a lot too. I'll never forget my first time playing this game and the various different ways it made me feel. Now, I can't describe all my feelings here, but I can't wait to make a full video detailing and dissecting everything about this game sometime within the next year, maybe, I don't know. And I'm incredibly excited to see what the DLC has in store for us, which may or may not be out by the time this video is uploaded. Despite all of its issues, Village will always be a very special game to me, and I can't wait to talk about it more when the time comes. Looking back at where Resident Evil first started, you can see that we've come a long way. At one point, the original Resident Evil was considered one of, if not the scariest game ever made, with its super scary monsters and the gameplay that revolved around conserving your resources so you don't die. And now the game is just really freaking funny.
Whoa.
This hall is dangerous.
And I don't say that to mock it for its age, no. I honestly find it beautiful that the game that was a pioneer of survival horror has found a new value in being so campy, hilarious, and enjoyable. But aside from that department, this game is severely outclassed by its many sequels. If I was just ranking RE1 by itself, then it would probably be near the bottom of the list or something. Now, if you really want to see an improved and far more timeless version of the game, then look no further than Resident Evil Remake. Probably the most beloved game in the entire series, and for a good reason. Resident Evil Remake has stood the test of time and serves as a perfect representation of the survival horror genre. This was the second game in the series I played, and I'm going to tell you straight up, this one is terrifying. Now, it's probably because this was the actual first survival horror game I played, but no other horror game came nearly as close to being as scary as this one, aside from maybe Silent Hill 4. It excels in building tension in ways that not a single other entry can even come close to replicating. The atmosphere and sound design are absolutely superb. The sheer dread I felt from every zombie moan, every loud step taken. It's almost a shocker that this game came out only 6 years after the original, yet was able to make so many stark improvements to every aspect of it in such a short period of time. Not really something you see anymore. The Crimson Heads added a new layer of fear and decision making, and they still scare me to this very day, which isn't something I can say about any other video game enemy. Like, I deliberately go out of my way to avoid killing zombies while playing this game, just so I won't have to deal with these guys. And I nearly had a heart attack when I saw gas canisters make a return in Zero. I can't really say much that hasn't already been said before. If you've ever wanted to get into horror games, then this is one of the best starting places. Remake was the first true survival horror game I played, and I was freaked out the whole way through. I don't find most horror games scary anymore thanks to this one solidifying my balls into concrete, and I wish a game could make me feel the way this one has made me feel. The ominous feel, the terror, and the sweet relief of the soothing save room theme. The only reason why it isn't higher, and I don't know if this will sound stupid or not, but I don't find it as fun to replay. I'm just not huge on the cave and the lab. Not that either of them are bad areas, I just find other games in the series more fun to replay. But in terms of horror and atmosphere, this is the best of the best. Okay, so I bet that most of you are either extremely confused or think that I straight up forgot about Resident Evil 0. No, I didn't. Yeah, this is my hottest Resident Evil take. I love Resident Evil 0. That's no surprise if you've ever watched my video about the game before, but to be honest, that review is pretty hit and miss since it was my first time talking about the series and I felt peer pressured into saying a few things that I didn't necessarily agree with. But yes, I'm aware I did in fact put it above so many other beloved titles. I don't care. Now let me clarify something first. Is Resident Evil 0 better than Resident Evil Remake? Well, yeah. Okay, in all seriousness, no, not really. Remake is objectively better than Zero, and I will never try to argue otherwise. It's a much more consistent, much more scary, and most importantly, much more well-designed game. Zero, on the other hand, has plenty of problems. The lack of item boxes in favor of the item dropping mechanic causes some issues, the enemy lineup isn't the greatest, the story is so stupid, the hook shot killed my grandma, and I know I say a lot of things killed her, but this is the true culprit, I swear. And all these are perfectly valid criticisms, don't get me wrong. However, replayability is a strong suit among all these games. Zero is no exception, and most of these big issues are easily avoided on subsequent playthroughs. Now obviously, those issues shouldn't be there in the first place. After all, why would you want to replay a game that had a ton of annoying things you didn't like? But my point is that when you know how to deal with these problems, you can begin to appreciate Zero's good qualities more, and those good qualities are really damn good. This game already looked great on the GameCube, but the HD remaster is no doubt my favorite looking Resident Evil game, even more so than the more recent releases. In fact, I think that it outright trumps Remake's HD remaster. There are so many little details and qualities in every single camera angle, it's insane. And while Zero isn't as scary as Remake, the atmosphere is still incredible. I think the locations don't get enough credit. The training facility is gorgeous and I adore the layout of it. Every environment here is so unique, such as the train, the treatment plant. Even the lab is actually something cool this time and utilizes the game's mechanics really well, making for some good puzzles. I feel like every RE game has at least one or two dull areas that I typically dread replaying. Zero, on the other hand, doesn't have a single weak moment in my opinion. This is one of the strongest area lineups the series has to offer. And even though the inventory can be a pain sometimes, I personally find it really engaging. Every time I play the game, I feel like I play a little differently and have to put a lot of thought into managing my inventory. I've always found it really fun. I totally understand it not being everyone's cup of tea though. Like, I remember on my first playthrough, I left my grenade launcher in this room right here, and I didn't want to go back and get it, so I had to do the final boss without the grenade launcher, so that was fun. And yet, even with all of these setbacks, Resident Evil 0 has always been one of my favorites. It was the last of the classic games, and we'll never get another one like this. And that's fine. I've played it like 10 times at this point, and it never gets old. It's not the most solid title, or the best one by any means. However, I still feel like it's greatly underappreciated. It's been 20 years since release, and if this really is the final classic Resident Evil game, then I don't know about you, but I'm perfectly okay with this last outing. I still hate those monkeys, though. Well, here it is. The game that ruined the whole franchise, but I still love it. As much as I do love Resident Evil 4 though, I've never really thought about how I would talk about it in a video. Because most of the things I'd say about it are things that have already been said about it 1,000 times before. So instead of repeating the million reasons why this game is pretty decent, let me speak about my experience with the game. This was my very first Resident Evil game. Late 2020, Christmas Day, I was browsing Steam, seeing what cool games I could buy for 10 cents when I saw Resident Evil Remake. I'd heard about the game before, and I had always wanted to play it and get into the series, but not being familiar with survival horror games, I was afraid to play it because I thought I'd get too scared to continue playing. But eventually, I pulled myself together, and I bought 4 instead. And it was so awesome, bro. Now, I still treated it like a survival horror game because random YouTubers who only played this game and none of the others conditioned me into believing it was like that. When, no. Nope, no, it's really not. It was an incredibly fun, well-designed action horror game with all sorts of fun combat sections, dozens of treasures and things to find, upgrades, so many weapons. And even though I was stressed out at the thought of running out of ammo or something, I was having the time of my life seeing what I've missed out on after so many years of hearing about the game. One of my fondest memories was playing through almost the entire island in one sitting, trying to finish the game up on New Year's Eve before the year ended, and the sheer satisfaction I felt when I got to the end and finally being able to say, I did it! I won! I beat a horror game! And then realizing it wasn't really a horror game. And soon after, I checked out all the extra content. I did a New Game Plus playthrough, then Professional, then another playthrough, and another. And then I unlocked everything, and in spite of the numerous times I've played through the game, I still find something new that I never knew about it, and I still have fun. You're rewarded for replaying the game and checking out everything it has to offer, which in turn just makes me want to play it again. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And that's not to say it doesn't get old after a little while. The game isn't perfect, of course. Yeah, shocking, I know. There are rooms in this game that I don't quite enjoy going through. I don't prefer the last few parts of the castle, parts of the island are a little boring. And the game is one of the longer titles in the series. It's not something I can just sit down and beat in 2 or 3 hours in one sitting, so I have to be willing to dedicate more time to it. But still, I'll never forget all of the fun I've had with it, and I'm looking forward to playing it many more times in the years to come. It's insane that a game that went through so many revisions had a huge change in focus, shifting from survival horror to action, and being released exclusively on a Nintendo console that wasn't matching the competition at the time, for a few seconds at least, ended up nailing it. Nowadays, if a game was released under those circumstances, it would be a disaster greater than the time I visited New Jersey. Speaking of potential disasters, the remake. Yeah, after seeing how RE3 ended up like a dog after getting its nutsack snipped, I think being at least a little bit concerned about how RE4's remake will turn out is more than justified. That, on top of RE4 for really not needing a remake due to how good and how widely available it is, it raises several red flags. I just hope the remake does stuff to make it stand out from the original. I highly doubt it'll outclass it, so the best I think it can do is take several aspects from the original game and mix it up. It's okay to get a mostly modernized version of the original, I just really want to see some new things to make it a unique, worthwhile experience. And also, being a finished product would be appreciated. Anyway, even if Capcom somehow messes it up, RE4 Original is still here, and it's still an infinitely fantastic, infinitely replayable, and infinitely fun game that could never be replaced. This next spot was a really tough call. Originally, RE4 was supposed to be here, but deep down, it didn't really feel right. Don't get me wrong, it'll always have a special place in my heart due to being my introduction to the series and all of the memories I have playing it, but Resident Evil 7 has stuck with me even harder. RE7 came out about almost 4 years before I got into the series, and back then, I knew it was a huge deal. Like, how unthinkable, for the first time in 5 years, they made an actually good Resident Evil game. A bit of an exaggeration, but everyone knows that this game's release marked the renaissance for the series. Capcom actually returned to the series' survival horror roots. There was a 15-year gap between this and Zero, the last survival horror entry. A lot of things changed in that time, and a lot of advancements in gaming had been made. Needless to say, a modern survival horror title was bursting with potential. And trust me, there are numerous missteps that 7 takes. However, the negatives are severely outweighed by the positives. Resident Evil 7 has my favorite exploration in the series. Every area, aside from the shorter last 2 locations, are incredibly memorable and fun to explore. The first-person perspective not only adds a whole new layer of fear to the combat, forcing you to remain calm under pressure so that you don't miss shots and waste ammo, but it also enhances the exploration by hiding items in creative places that make searching every nook and cranny all the more rewarding. The gunplay is more in-depth too. There's much more of a skill ceiling here, and the weapons feel wonderful. A shotgun makes me feel like I'm blowing up a box of oatmeal. But what truly makes 7 even more special has to be everything else. This game has my favorite story in the series. I mean, I guess it's not really a high bar. The Baker family not only make for entertaining antagonists, but finding out what made them the way they are is really interesting. Considering how over the top and sometimes weird, for the wrong reasons, the last few stories have been, giving this one a much smaller scale in comparison is refreshing. And yet, as we learned from Village, it's only a side effect from something far bigger. And I was still more engaged with this story. I had so much fun playing this game and seeing what wild thing would happen next that I couldn't tear myself away from it. With every other one I played before this, I had my fun, sure, but there would be certain points where I'd get stressed out and have to take a break. But by the time I got to 7, I was pretty comfortable with this genre and wasn't as scared as I was enthralled. Not to mention all of the playtime I got out of the DLC, so many fun side modes, some of which giving you more insight regarding the game's plot, and others like Nightmare and 21 just being excellent minigames. I can't talk about it all here since we've been here for long enough as is, but it's great, and if you love this game like I do, then you should absolutely play them. Now, I'm aware that there's a massive giraffe in the room that I failed to mention. And that's this game's problems. Unfortunately, 7, while finely tuned in almost every way, has a couple of glaring issues that detractors love to point out. For one, the lack of enemy variety. I hope you love the KFC toilet monsters because that's all you're going to be fighting through the whole game. I love the molded. I love how creepy they look and how unpredictable they can be. But I stopped being scared of them 5 minutes after I saw my first one, and that's not good when they're the only enemies for this like 7-hour-long game. And there are only like 2 or 3 variations. A much bigger problem for me, though, has to be the unskippable cutscenes. Yeah, for some reason, this video game released in 2017 prevents you from skipping all but 2 cutscenes, which hurts because I want to play this game over and over again, but every time I consider doing another playthrough, I have to remind myself that if I want to do that, then I have to see, hey baby, I gotta watch Lucas trim his nails and see Ethan get treated like a cat for the 9th time.
Now go, garage. Now.
They can update the game 5 years later to add in ray tracing, but not give us a basic feature that I doubt is that hard to implement. And finally, the big one. Resident Evil 7 Boat. This is not the worst area in the whole series, but it is my least favorite. Sure, the training facility in Code Veronica is an unpleasant mess, and Jake Chapter 3 makes me want to eat cement, but at least those are in games I already don't like. I loved Resident Evil 7 up till this point, and the boat just exposed every problem the game had and made for a boring and lame finale to an amazing game. My thoughts on the area are complicated, and I still have more to say about it for another time, but it's always just left a bad taste in my mouth. However, let's not pretend that this one not-so-great area... These two not-so-great areas ruined the game. This lackluster final fourth or so of the game could have been a lot better, but it'll never take away from all of the greatness it was giving me up till then. Ever since I first finished the game, I've begun to appreciate certain things about it more and more. It never gets worse, it just gets better. It's the most fulfilling experience in the whole series, and it's only number 2 because of those inconveniences. While number 1 is an even more refined game, 7 is better than it in some regards. So, I don't even think it's appropriate to call this game just my second favorite. Honestly, this and number 1 might as well be tied. Even with its negative aspects, Resident Evil 7 shines brightly as one of my favorite video games of all time. It's not just a spectacular survival horror game, but it's also the savior of an amazing series. Well, I don't suppose there's much point in doing any build-up to number 1, because if you use the advanced technique of process of elimination, then I'm pretty sure you can figure out what it is. So, I've got 2 words to describe Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Holy shit!
Yep, we've come full circle. My least favorite game in the series is RE3 Remake, and my favorite is RE2 Remake. What a significant gap in quality. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a primary example of why we need more modern survival horror games. It takes this old genre and puts a brand new spin on it, giving us one of the best horror games out there. But what exactly does it do so well, and why is it my favorite? Well, let's start going down the list of what I look for in a survival horror game. Okay, so first off, environments. I've brought up areas a lot throughout this list, and for a good reason. These games are extremely replayable, and because of that, I obviously want the levels I'll be going through a dozen or so times across multiple playthroughs to be good. RE2 Remake has 3 major areas, just like the original, and in my opinion, this is the most consistently good lineup in the series. In the original RE2, the police station was undoubtedly the best area in the game due to it being the biggest and most complex. Not that the sewer and lab were bad, they just weren't as in-depth and more so felt focused on wrapping up the story. In the remake, the police station is better than ever. I'd go as far as to say it's my favorite location across every game. There's so many more items to find now, and the enemies are more dangerous than ever. In a lot of the classic games, if you had a plan to get through each room, then you could probably execute it easily and get through it just fine. Meanwhile, in this game, due to zombies and especially Mr. X being unpredictable, it feels like even if you have an idea of what to do, the game can just throw a wrench into that plan if you're not careful and don't think ahead. And I mean that in a good way. I love it whenever Mr. X intercepts my path and now I have to make up a new one on the fly. It makes the whole playthrough a lot more engaging due to how differently things can play out every single time. Not to mention, I think the sewers and lab are a lot better in this game due to them having much different layouts and the new enemies added there. The G-Mutants can be a giant tanky roadblock to get past if you don't know how to handle them, and the Ivies genuinely creep me out with how they twitch and move around. And I guess they're also scary because they can one-shot you, I suppose. The Lickers made a great transition too, and I always underestimate just how much faster they are now. Oh my! The new third-person view makes combat even more nerve-wracking, yet fun, just like 7. The game has a perfect difficulty, being fairly challenging on a first playthrough, and hardcore being great for veterans. And going for an S+ rank on hardcore is probably my favorite challenge in the whole series. It puts my knowledge and skill to the ultimate test, and I always barely scrape by with only a few minutes to spare and only making it out with like a rock and a bag of Fritos. The game is just the perfect length too, clocking in at roughly 2 hours once you know what you're doing, making for a great game to chill out with when I'm bored while not being too much of a time commitment. It helps that the pacing here is great. Certain other entries in the series have a lot of time waster segments that might be okay on your first playthrough, but every time you replay it, it's just so boring and you want to get back to the good parts. That's basically what a third of Village is. The worst RE2 gets are the Ada and Sherry segments. Now Ada's really drags on. It's like 10 to 15 minutes of walking and talking. It's like going to Walmart with your mom. It's not fun, it takes forever, and you end up getting shot. Sherry's is a lot shorter though, and you get to listen to the greatest line delivery of all time.
It's all over now! Doors locked!
But both of these are so much more tame in comparison to House Beneviento and the boat tape. Aside from giving us the ability to skip those segments on repeat playthroughs, the only thing I could ask for from the game is a better B scenario. This is like my one real gripe with the remake, and something the original does better without question. The B scenarios are not affected by what you did in the A scenario, it's more like an arrange mode if anything. And I like the changes the B scenarios make, but so much more replayability could have been added if they were just like how they were in the original game. It really stings. And I don't really care for the side modes like Ghost Survivors. I mean, they're okay, I guess. But if I'm booting up this game, it's solely for the main story. Certainly speaks volumes about the quality of that main story, though. Despite lacking in the extra content department and the B scenarios not being so hot, this is still my favorite Resident Evil. I've replayed the multiple scenarios about 14 times in total now, and I know I'll play the game several more times in the future. Clear Scenario specifically is my favorite campaign in the whole series, and no matter how many times I play it, I'll never get sick of it. Every other game has something, some part that I might not like so much, or I might find boring. RE2R doesn't have any of that. Except fuck you, Ada. But apart from that, it's a blast the whole way through. I didn't think this highly of the game when I first played it. I still liked it, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't until I played it again and again and again and again that I realized just how well it holds up. I don't know what else to say. It's damn near excellent, and no doubt in my mind, my absolute favorite survival horror game ever made. Well, that's everything. I'd still love to give most of these games their own videos in the future and talk about them even more, but for now, that's all I've got to say. Have a good Halloween, fellows. I'm looking forward to that Village DLC. It may or may not be out by the time this video's up, but yeah, thank you very much for watching.